Imagine working 80% of your full-time job for 100% of the pay. That's what's on the table in the United States right now.
One of the issues that we have got to talk about is stress in this country. The fact that so many people are going to work exhausted, physically and mentally.
Maybe it's no surprise that it's Senator Bernie Sanders leading this charge, but the idea of a 4-day work week has some momentum behind it.
Such a fan. It would be life-changing.
Kick the morning off strong by catching up on the 4 years of sleep the corporate world has robbed from me.
I hope this is the new big trend.
The truth is, working class people aren't lazy, they're fed up.
And there's some heavy criticism too.
If you want to see those same employees really stressed out, just see what happens where their employers lay them off to hire part-time workers instead, or have to close their doors because they cannot make enough revenue.
So how would a 4-day work week actually work? What Sanders wants to do for most Americans is change the standard from 40 hours, 5 days a week, to 32 hours, 4 days a week, without reducing an employee's pay.
In 1940, we came up with a 40-hour work week. 1940. Who is going to deny that the economy has not fundamentally and radically changed over that period of time?
For most salaried employees, this proposal ends up being pretty straightforward. So you get the same annual pay, even though you only work 4 days a week in this case. And across the board, everyone would be entitled to overtime pay, which is paid at time and a half, if they work more than 8 hours in any single day. But let's say you get paid by the hour. Now it's very different. So your wage wouldn't change. You made 20 bucks an hour before, you still make 20 bucks an hour. So a 32-hour a week paycheck looks like $640 if you do the math, and over here it works out to $800. So that's a bit of a difference. If you work more than 32 hours, good news. You get paid time and a half, which is great. If your boss lets you keep up a 40-hour work week, which is 8 hours of overtime, which I think works out to $880. It's not so great if your boss doesn't want to pay that premium.
In some ways, it's almost a wage increase.
For instance, if you have a retail shop, you need coverage. And so perhaps employing more people to cover the same amount of hours that you typically did is going to increase your overall costs.
There are some protections built in to the proposed bill. For example, employers wouldn't be allowed to cut wages or salaries to make up for the extra overtime or the reduced hours. And it wouldn't all happen at once. Every year, for 4 years, the work week would shrink by 2 hours. So you go from 40 to 38 to 36 to 34 and finally to 32. Again, if you work more than those amounts, you get overtime pay. So on the face of it, this might look like employers having to pay more for the same productivity. But there is data to suggest that's not the whole truth. And this could be a win for everybody. Americans and Canadians spend more time at work than people in many other similar countries. On average, people in Iceland, Finland, Belgium, Germany, Denmark, Norway, Austria, and the Netherlands all work less than 35 hours a week. France actually mandates a 35-hour work week and is considering reducing it to 32.
This is something that's been kind of enshrined in the US system since like 1940s, but with other countries trying and experimenting with reducing the hours to like a 35-hour work week, it suggests that other countries like Canada and the US could also be productive.
And we have seen more and more companies in North America willing to give it a try. One recent pilot recruited 41 companies from Canada and the US and asked each participant to rate a range of factors before and after the 6-month trial, including their self-reported physical health, life satisfaction, mental health, and work-life balance. In every case, the numbers went up, which maybe is like unsurprising, right? Wouldn't we all feel better if we worked fewer hours? But it wasn't just workers that benefited. The companies that took part also reported, on average, a 15% growth in revenue. And every single one planned to keep the policy in place after the pilot ended. Because even working just 32 hours a week, these companies say they were able to get just as much done, sometimes even more.
Productivity actually went up because workers were able to focus on their work. They were not exhausted. They were happy to go to work.
Another recent pilot in the UK involving 61 companies tried more or less the same thing. For these companies, revenue stayed pretty steady. But what they did notice was that both employee turnover and the number of sick days went down.
If you give people this incredible incentive of a whole day of your time a week, they're going to work really hard to become more productive.
But there's another argument Sanders and others are making, and this one's a little more philosophical.
Technology has made working people far more productive. And what has been the result of all of that productivity increase for working people? Almost all of the economic gains of that technological transformation have gone straight to the top.
Part of Sanders' pitch here is that with every single tech innovation, shouldn't we be easing the burden on employees? Workers and businesses have become more and more efficient, producing more in less time. Just think of factory workers churning out parts on an assembly line, or doctors consulting virtually, or just the sheer volume of stuff we're all able to buy and sell online. I mean, look at this graph, measuring how efficiently workers convert inputs, meaning labor, capital, energy, and materials, into the output of goods and services. It's a complicated calculation, but as you can see here, productivity has gone up a lot over the last 70 plus years.
One worker is now doing what 12 workers used to do.
And consider how using artificial intelligence could be like adding rocket boots to a company's bottom line.
I think this is going to be the greatest leap forward that we've had so far, and the greatest leap forward of any of the big technological revolutions we've had so far.
AI means automation. It can think, it can organize, it can find patterns, it can create, it can do the work of people.
With generative AI, we are able to synthesize new texts, new images, new sounds, new videos. This is a sort of creativity, which is kind of baffling.
A recent study by McKinsey predicts by 2030, activities that account for up to 30% of hours currently worked across the US economy could be automated, a trend accelerated by generative AI. So the argument goes, instead of everybody working just as hard as we always do, why don't we ease up a bit?
The question that we are asking today is a pretty simple question. Do we continue the trend that technology only benefits the people on top, or do we demand that these transformational changes benefit working people?
Meaning more leisure time, less stress for the same pay.
It's really hard to predict how AI is going to influence the labor market. But if we do start seeing the elimination of whole categories of jobs, or fewer hours are needed for live humans that are working, then you might see growing societal pressure to try to reduce the work week.
Now, the main counter-argument is that reducing the amount of work employees do will also make it more expensive for businesses to employ them.
If this policy is implemented, it would threaten millions of small businesses operating on a razor-thin margin.
Remember, if this bill became law, employers would be required to pay their staff overtime for more than 32 hours a week, or 8 hours a day. But there's nothing stopping them from simply giving hourly employees fewer hours, or hiring more part-time employees to avoid those costs.
Now they've got the same workers, but only for 3/4 of the time, and they have to hire more. In fact, there's even an incentive for them to dip down so they make everybody part-time, and then they don't have to pay certain penalties.
Also, given the types of companies that are potentially capable of cutting their work week, we could see a divide of the rich getting richer, having more time, and the poor needing to take on 3 part-time jobs in order to pay the bills.
And the idea of requiring overtime pay for anyone who works more than an 8-hour shift, that would be a big change in jobs where long days right now are just kind of part of the gig, right? Public transit, healthcare, emergency services, logistics.
This proposal only works if you reduce 8 hours a work week and have the workers have the same level of productivity that they had at 40 hours. It just doesn't work in many industries.
So let's take healthcare just as an example. One of the most common schedules for nurses in the United States is to work 3 consecutive 12-hour shifts, followed by 4 days off. Under Bernie Sanders' plan, 3 12-hour shifts is 4 hours of overtime a day. That's a third of a nurse's pay that would suddenly be paid at time and a half.
That's going to have a very negative impact on the healthcare community in this country and cause healthcare expenses to go up.
These are among many reasons this bill, in its current form, doesn't really stand a chance of passing. So far, it has the support of just 2 other lawmakers. One of them, Mark Takano, proposed an almost identical bill last year, and that bill got the support of just 7 colleagues in the House.
I don't think it's going to pass in this current iteration, but I think this conversation needs to be had. We're going to have to reallocate a lot of resources, how people do work, when people do work, how are people paid.
Wouldn't we all like the same pay for fewer hours? And there are more and more companies who see this as a way forward. It's just, if you're in the United States, don't expect the government to mandate it anytime soon.